suggesting that we bring in AI into every talk today, and that's the topic we're going to cover in here. I think I've referenced it in all 4 talks that we've had so far. And the title of this talk is Building Human First Startups in the AI Age. So I think every single subject we've covered today has talked exactly to that line. So I'm really excited to welcome Shae and Caitlin for this discussion on stage today. So Shae is a founder, speaker, and PhD candidate at Harvard University, helping entrepreneurs to build sustainable human-first startups in the age of AI. As the founder of Analogue Social, named a 2025 semi-finalist in the Harvard President's Innovation Challenge, she draws on what she calls analogue intelligence, the art of critical thinking, authentic storytelling, and genuine human connection, which I guess can be seen as ever more important in an age of AI. She holds a BA from the University of Chicago, MA and teaching certificate from Harvard, and is passionate about equipping mission-driven founders, as we've talked about earlier, with the mindset and tools to thrive burnout-free in today's fast-moving tech landscape. So I'm excited to hear from you. Our talk host for this session, for our fireside chat, is Caitlin Gould, an award-winning founder, digital strategist, and inclusivity advocate. So pulling on that last thread there, with over 15 years' experience in senior leadership roles within the tech sector. She's the founder and director of TECWomen CIC, which was established in 2020 after launching the grassroots initiative Tech Girls the year before, to inspire girls in the Southwest to see themselves in technology, engineering, and creative digital careers. I know if you are keen to support that mission in the Southwest, then please do come and find Caitlin and her team at the Tech Girls stand outside. And I will just hand over and let you introduce and follow on that conversation. Thank you very much.
So, hi everyone. So we're going to do fireside chat. We tried to practice this earlier this week, and we talked for an hour, and my phone turned me off because it was time for me to go to bed. So we'll try to keep it on time, but we just had so much to talk about. So I wanted to first say welcome. It's really exciting to have another American here. My accent's about to change, so all of you who have known me for a while, it's going to get weirder. Yeah. But I just wanted to start by saying, obviously, you based originally in America, you're here now. We're here talking about communities and startup communities. For you, making that move over, what differences have you seen in the startup communities in the US versus the startup communities here?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's so great to be here. I actually got lost on my way here because I was taking the train down from London, and they kept saying Newquay. And I kept saying New Quay. So I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to New Quay. I'm going somewhere named New Quay. So I'm still like adjusting myself to understanding how to pronounce things. But I'd say there's a few differences, right? I feel like America is going through a huge renaissance of innovation right now within the tech industry, because a lot of tools that used to be inaccessible to a lot of founders are now accessible because of AI. And because of that, there's hyper competition. There's a desire to grow at all costs. There is of course, hot spots like San Francisco or New York or even Boston if you're building in the health tech space. And as a result of that, you see a lot of people are actually starting to enter the AI industry, which is very encouraging. But the flip side of that is you're having more and more people actually experience burnout from having to scale at all costs or to build according to a VC timeline instead of a human-first timeline, which I'm happy to talk more about. As opposed to when I came to the UK, I came this past summer, and for me, as I spoke with more founders, spoke with more builders and entrepreneurs and people who are really just interested in building solutions for problems that are plaguing their communities, they tend to have a more customer-centric approach. And what I mean by that is they're focusing on the problem itself and not whether or not it's going to make them $1 billion within 9 years or 10 years, according to a certain timeline. So for me, I think there was actually a slower pace to the UK market or the European market that some people may or may not like, which I'm happy to talk more about. But I think that slower pace is really important in terms of long-term sustainability. So there is sort of a short-term mindset that you find a lot in the startup ecosystem in the US, whereby people are like, how can I, become meta in like 3 years? Or how can I become lovable, which I think scaled to a unicorn status in about like 10 months, right? So there's that pressure. As opposed to with the founders I've worked with in the UK, they're much so like, okay, how can I build something sustainable, long-term, and ultimately viable for specifically a UK, European market?
And I think that's a really interesting point. I remember when I went to a medtech conference in the US and met a couple of founders, and they're like, yeah, this is my 5th startup. I'm going to run it. It's opening. I'm getting funding. We're going to build it. And then I'm going to sell it within the next 3 years and move on to my next one. And I just remember going like, do you actually want to make a business or you're just flipping things? And whereas most of the founders I know here, they're building the company they want to work in.
Yes.
And the company they want to develop. And yeah, they have buyout plans and they have investment plans, but they're not seeing how they can sell it as quickly as possible. They're not building to sell. They're building to solve a problem.
Yeah, exactly.
When we were talking about this the other night, you have some great analogies that you talk on your social media about a little bit in terms of the animal analogy. So in the startup world, we've got unicorns, and lots of people talking about unicorns. Cornwall's not really a natural habitat for unicorns, despite the mist outside. What other kind of animals out there? Like, do we need a new kind of animal that's maybe not made up?
Yeah, no, I always say, especially to newer founders, there's actually an entire animal kingdom to the startup world. So, we're so familiar with the unicorn, which, is mythological, but if anything, starting to become more common. So I don't know how mythological it's going to be long term. But there's other animals to think about. So like the zebra analogy came up where you're trying to balance how do I make a profit, but also caring for the planet, people, and purpose at the same time. That analogy is really great for people who are building more so sustainable, especially environmental climate tech companies. There's a climate tech founder I spoke with last night, actually, who's trying to focus on how do I build environmentally friendly policies into certain B2B businesses within the food space, but at the same time realizing that we're not a charity. We still have to make profit, but people can still invest in us knowing that we're trying to absolutely improve the environment and make sure it's sustainable for humans, right? So finding that balance. And then you have camel companies, companies who are built for the long haul and also built for times of drought and uncertainty. There's a lot of uncertainty depending on the market that you're working in, whereby you won't necessarily scale immediately. What you're building has to actually make sure it can stand the test of time. I'm thinking about people, once again, who are working in the climate tech space, where it's like you're trying to build a new system, a new technology, even a new way of building to make sure that it can survive. For example, a lot of the food droughts that a lot of scientists are predicting are going to happen soon. A lot of the environmental changes, also a lot of socio-political changes. I think one thing that people aren't really realizing is that a lot of the institutions that we have come to rely on are not as stable as people think. So it's like, how do you build a company that can survive? For example, if you have to move countries today, if you decided like today, I'm going to move out of Cornwall or I'm going to move out of the UK, would your business thrive in another market? Would it thrive in another company? Another country is what I'm trying to say. And then you have something that I love to call sort of like cat companies. So how cats can just like roam around, they're free, they have a good time. They, as long as the door's open, they'll come back. They're very solo. And I think now because of AI, you're having solopreneurs who are scaling at, impeccable paces. And because of that, because of AI tools, because, they no longer have to hire as widely or, with as big of a team as before, they can actually, make a pretty big business impact. And I think that in part is because of the growth of the creator economy. So now you have a lot of founder creators who are trying to figure out, like, how do I tell my unique story about my business, and also making sure that I'm using a very free, at this moment, distribution channel, which is social media and other sites and things of that sort. And then finally, you have the elephant company, which is more so mission-driven, moving at a slower pace, and also building in public. If you have a company that nobody knows anything about, even if it's the greatest product in the world, if you can't reach those first 100 customers, or you can't reach, that specific business that you're selling to, it's as if you're as mythical as a unicorn. You just don't have the money to be mythical. So there's a whole animal kingdom, and I think once you realize the kind of animal you want to be, you can actually relieve some of the pressure valves of being a founder, because you no longer have to fit the mold of being a unicorn or, being an animal that, just doesn't fit what you're trying to do long term.
Yeah, and I really like the cat analogy. I picture that as like all the founders that you see doing stuff in Lisbon. Just lying in the sun by the beach. Like I'm sure that's not what their actual life is like. But it's what social media tells me their life is like.
Yeah.
And that brings up a really good point. As we are seeing more founders on social media and as people are sharing their journeys a lot more, there's still that pressure, like whether you're a cat or an elephant or an ant or, there's still, you're seeing that pressure of being a founder.
Yeah.
And a lot of the stuff that you talk about as well is how there is this pressure on you as a founder to perform, even if you're not a unicorn. And especially as we're moving into a world where you are a creator founder.
Yeah.
So you're somebody that maybe has the development skills or the creative skills or the marketing skills, and you're getting into this startup space. And the machine of the startup starts to spin you so fast, and the pressures from the machine starts to spin you so fast that you do face something like burnout.
Yeah.
And I know for you personally, burnout is a lot of your journey into how your startup started. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that, your own experiences with burnout, and then how that's led to Analog Social.
Yeah, so I crashed pretty hard, I think about a year and a half ago. So my problem is I've always been an overachiever. Ever since I was a kid, if you put me in a sandbox and told me I had to like build the highest castle, like I would spend like 2 hours like perfecting every single grain of sand to make sure that I like won the competition, right? So I think a lot of it is just my personality and, going through the notions of a merit-based society where it's like the harder you work, the bigger the prize, the more, accolades that you get. And I got to the point in my PhD specifically where I was just like, why am I doing this? Because I always say being a PhD is actually quite similar to being an entrepreneur in the sense that you have completely unstructured days. You can spend your days, looking at the newest, like, go-to-market strategy or how to specifically fix this one bug within your, code or something like that. Same thing with a PhD. We can spend hours reading, hours working on one specific section of a chapter that you're not going to actually end up using. And it's very, long-term. You're really the bottleneck for your own business when you're first starting out your company or you're writing a dissertation or something like that. And the amount of isolation that came through that process, because very few people actually know and understand what it means to build something from scratch. There's a lot of talk about, I want to be the next greatest entrepreneur. I want to be the next Steve Jobs. But you also have to realize Steve Jobs didn't have the best diet in the world. You know what I mean? He didn't have the best routines, and he didn't even have, necessarily the best kind of relationships with his friends and with his family long term. So I always caution against the desire to be someone that you don't know their entire holistic life. And I was reaching that point where it's on paper, I was even shocked when you were reading the bio. I was like, oh my gosh, is that me? I was just a little out of body experience because it's at a certain point, the accolades don't really matter. What matters, what long term, is my mental health, my relationship with my family and with my friends, and even professional relationships with my advisors. And I think those long periods of isolation, you think it's just grinding, you think it's just hustling, you think it's just how do we become the number one unicorn in this specific market. But in reality, it's if you don't like the idea of waking up every morning, then you have a problem, because you can't scale if you're constantly anxious. You can't scale if you're doom scrolling for 7 hours a day. You can't scale if you haven't talked to your kids in a few days. You don't know what's going on at school, things of that sort. So I reached that point, and I said, I'm going to drop out. I have zero shame. You know what I mean? It's by all intents and purposes, I have already reached the highest possible accolades. And it's so crazy because when I believe I called my mom. No, I called my mom and my dad was there. So I'm ready to have the tough conversation, hey, I'm about to drop out of Harvard. I know you already have the graduation regalia ready. You got the guest list ready. You're 110% ready to make a show of this. But I'm going to drop out. And my parents were like, okay, yeah, cool. you're going to find a job, right? Like, you just, they're trying to figure out, like, what's the next step. And I didn't know my dad was in the room when I called my mom. But my dad said, the moment you're ready to give something up, that's how you know you're ready to complete it. And I needed to hear that because I think sometimes when we're building startups, when we're building companies, when we're building movements, because I love the work you're doing as well, is trying to make the tech industry more inclusive. If you are so consumed by the vision, you are so consumed by the idea, whether it's money, whether it's accolade, whether it's, being the next Steve Jobs, if you're so consumed by that, you become completely captured by that business. So much so that if the business fails, you think you're a failure. If you can't get the customers, you think, oh man, I'm just horrible at marketing. If the market shifts suddenly, which with AI that's going to happen quite frequently and quite soon, you're going to start to take it personally, and that can end really badly. So I reached a point where I was like, you know what, let me take a break from my PhD, because my dad is right. The moment you're ready to give something up, that's the moment you're ready to lead it. And I said, let me get a bunch of strangers that I know in my area that I met through a few networking events. And I said, would you come to a dinner that was completely phone free? No devices, no anything. Just completely turn your phones off. No talking about work, nothing like that. And we'll just have a good time. To my surprise, all 7 strangers said yes. And we rented out a nice restaurant in the DC area. And we had a phone-free dinner. And half of them were founders and the other half were artists, knowledge workers, creatives, and things of that sort. And, like any good unconscious go-to-market strategy, the word started to spread. We started hosting more and more events. And at the time, I was in between London and DC. So I started hosting events in London. And then next you know, Analog Social was born because we wanted to create a space for founders to deeply connect with one another on a human-to-human level, but then to also have a space where you can socialize outside of social media. Because when you really think about it, we spend so much time on social media, and as a founder creator, which I'm happy to talk more about, that can almost consume your life. So I think the big takeaway is the burnout that I was having actually birthed a new idea the moment that I sat down and said, I'm willing to lose it all, and therefore this thing won't consume me or become my entire identity. Long-winded answer, but hopefully I got
great.
to the heart of what you're asking.
Well, and I think one of the when we talked about that as well, because gone through my own periods of burnout too, and again, if you know me or see, and the thing I always hear from people is oh my gosh, how do you do so much? And I kind of was like, oh, is it not normal? I thought it was totally normal to launch 2 companies at the same time while I had a 3-month-old because I was bored. And what I didn't realize at the time was, one, that's just a part of me. It's a part of my neurodiversity. I've always kind of been busy. It was a part of my rejection, or feeling of rejection and moving from a different business and wanting to do something new. And it was a part of trying to prove something. And that puts a lot of pressure on it. And you go through the great journey. And I had an amazing co-founder. I was in the women's health space. We had a great idea. It was super topical. We should have just said AI was in it. I was way too honest. I was like, we'll use AI when AI is ready. Everyone else was like, oh yeah, we already use AI. Anyways, lesson learned. And we built a great business, but the journey that we went on while we were doing it, the business pivoted a lot while we were chasing revenue, and the business changed, and it stopped being what we wanted to do. And suddenly we woke up one day, and we went from building a platform to delivering a course. We went from being friends with a vision to sending really evil WhatsApp messages to each other at nighttime. And we just looked at this and we're like, what are we doing? And it was that really weird thing where it's we actually have a business that's making money. It's actually making revenue. It's bootstrapped. It's there. But we don't like it anymore. And we're not happy. And I'm scared to answer the phone to my co-founder, who was my friend. And we actually made the call of let's just stop. Like you said, we paused it, we put it down. She's a doctor. She went to make actual money again. I realized actually a lot of my passion was in the nonprofit that I was doing on the side. And I was like, what if I put all the energy I was doing into that, into growing that instead, where I get joy from it. And we're still really great friends. It still sits there. As HMRC reminded me the other day. Oh yeah, sorry, it's still there. You know, and we're just waiting. Yeah. We're waiting to see what's happening in the market as well. We're waiting to see if our original products got value. And we're still talking to each other and we're friends now.
So good.
And I think that's the thing too, is like burnout looks very different. Sometimes you can be in the middle of success and not realize that actually it's not right. And like you said, it can spin you in different ways. Totally trying to make a very interesting transition. We're talking here about a lot of human stuff, and we're talking about what to do with burnout and startups. You mentioned earlier, there's this juxtaposition between what AI can do and can't do. So we both said how we had to stop and pause and do a little bit. But with that world of AI, it does kind of constantly feel like it's increasing the pace. I know when we were chatting the other day, we were saying, and some of the stuff you share on your social medias as well, is that there is this kind of interesting balance between like good AI and dangerous AI. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit more about how your startup, which is very analog focused, but you still embrace a lot of AI. And how do you hold those two spaces?
Yeah, I think, it's a very delicate balance, because I always say I'm more so, if I do have any worries, which I do have, actually quite a few worries. But if I have any worries about the AI industry, it's more so about the people leading the industry than the technology itself. Because I think what's happening right now is that people are either demonizing or exalting the technology over the people who are building it. So if you have leaders that want to use AI to replace people, you always want to replace those people. So let's put the responsibility where the responsibility should be, which is on the founders, which is on the tech leaders, which is, on the people that are building these technologies, because, the technology is such a good impersonator. That's why it's artificial. So if you yourself don't run, a company that's focused on, human enrichment, making sure that you're actually solving real problems, not churning things out just because you have to. Like, that's another common problem with creator founders right now, who are trying to increase their output, but not realizing that AI is actually decreasing the quality. Because if you don't have a personality, it's hard to be on social media. You know what I mean? If you sound like everybody else, if you're using the same prompts that you bought off Etsy, if you're, constantly trying to repeat the same formats that other people are doing in order to get attention to their startup, then you end up looking like everyone else. I always say the best way to stand out as a startup, as a company, as a person on social media, is to be your most unhinged self. You know what I mean? Don't try to fit in at all. People always ask me about the creator economy, and they're like, how is the creator economy going to shift in the age of AI? And I'm not actually quite worried about that, because some of the most interesting, thoughtful creators that I follow, at least, are completely unhinged. Like, when I see the connections that they make, the type of comedy that they produce, how they display their products, the type of things that they talk about, the type of commentary, that's another thing. If you, once again, don't have a personality, if you don't know how to connect with humans, if you don't know how to tell a compelling story, why should I use your product? Because there's always the option of not using it.
People can always tell that I wrote my LinkedIn post because there's like 12 spelling mistakes.
Yes, exactly, stuff like that.
AI would have caught that. In fact, my husband goes through it and is like, corrects all of my spelling mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you check this? I was like, meh.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where I always say, there's ways to show up in social media without social media completely consuming your time. So I always say, dedicate anywhere from a half hour to 2 hours a week, deciding like, okay, what do you want to talk about this week? How do you want to display your product? What messaging is going to land with your consumers? Because your consumers are humans. They're fickle. One day they may say they want this thing. The next day they're like, actually, no, I want like a different solution. Or they don't even know how to properly articulate their problem. So like, for example, one thing I do a lot is that I use social media as sort of like informal user research. How are people talking about the problems that they're facing? How much of a frustration is it for them? What tools are they currently using? Like, don't just let social media be a place for you to have fun, which you should. That can be a form of relief. But at the same time, using that online data to inform your offline data, how you're talking about it in company meetings and like things of that sort. So I always say, like, find the right balance in the sense of knowing when to be online, when it's for research, when it's for connecting with potential customers, when it's for figuring out, like, how do I tell a good founder story so I can attract the right investors, I can attract the right talent, I can attract the right customer, because you can have a wrong customer, you can have a wrong investor. And these are free ways to try it by being on social media, while at the same time having periods of time where you're intentionally offline. So, like, I never use social media first thing in the morning. I never use social media before I have to make a big decision, because when you think about it, you're scrolling and those are other people's thoughts. Those are not your thoughts. So you're being crowded and inundated with so much information that you're like, actually, do I really think this, or did I just scroll for like 30 minutes and now I'm like taking in, market projections, what someone said about this, and like the next like news event that's going to pop up on my timeline. So
yeah, I think that's a really good point too. I was talking to one of my friends here earlier today, and I was saying how over the summer I wasn't getting back to people because I was taking an intentional break.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, maybe I'll put a post up about how I was feeling really burnt out because I was on here too much, and that's why I'm not going back to anybody. And then I started to write. I was like, no, I just need to actually read my own post and turn it away, write it down, and go back to the beach and go back and spend time in real life.
Yeah.
And I think that is the challenge of, too, when you see it, you're like, oh, I should have something to say on that. I should have a comment on it. And it's that balance of needing to know, like, where you're actually adding value to the conversation versus just adding noise to it. And my go-to now is just like, oh, if somebody else said something I think is really cool, I'll just reshare that. Like, I don't need to say it myself, or a comment or something.
I mean, just to piggyback off of what you just said, I think one thing that's really helpful is people communicating their communication rhythms and communication styles. So I always say, if you text me, I am a horrible texter. Micro communication is very difficult for me because I always have to dedicate anywhere from 3 to 5 hours of my day to like deep work where it's like no interruptions, just completely like focused on one specific task, whether it's my dissertation or stuff with the company and things of that sort. But for example, I love voice notes because I'm a yapper, if you can't tell by now. I'm a huge yapper. So it's very easy for me to communicate that way. And I always say, like, hey, like my rhythm of communication might be different from yours. That doesn't mean that my silence is an answer. Because I've had times where people move forward on stuff and they just assumed I said no because I didn't respond. When in reality, it's like certain big decisions may take me, a few days to respond. Other decisions may take a few hours. But I think just communicating how you communicate is so crucial, whether it's founder to founder, dealing with co-founders, on a business level, on a company-wide level, whatever level it may be, just being very clear, like, okay, my silence is not a no or an answer.
Well, and I have to say that's my dream for AI. Like, what I would really like is AI to be able to be the personal assistant I can't afford. So that actually it can message anybody that's sent me a WhatsApp message to say, oh no, she has all of her alerts turned off because she's trying to actually get this funding application done, but she does care about you and we'll get back to you at some point. I just need that person in there to do that. And I think, that is one of the things that we talked about the other night too, in terms of some of those opportunities for AI to help so you don't feel burnt out. So like on one hand, it's pushing people to do more than they've ever done before. And it feels like, oh my gosh, I've got to do all of this stuff because now AI's there, or I have to figure out how the heck to put AI into my startup so that I get funding. But on the flip side, I love what you said earlier, like about the fact it's a tool. So there's so much focus on AI being a part of your business model, but there doesn't seem to be enough focus on AI just being a tool that founders can use for themselves, even if there's no AI in their company.
Yeah, exactly. So one thing I always suggest for founders to do is to actually sit down and write down what your day-to-day looks like. So what task are you usually performing? Who are you communicating with? How are you communicating with them? What tools you normally use. If you usually use Zoom, Asana, all those different types of things. So just take a stock of what you're actually using on your day-to-day basis. And then I would make it sort of like a matrix. You can decide how best to replace those workflows, systems, things of that sort, based on how you prioritize your own values. So like, for example, I really prioritize having in-person, back and forth communication or voice note communication, because I truly believe a lot of things get lost in like text messages and all this other stuff. So I prefer to have time on my calendar where I'm specifically connecting with people. So whether it's phone calls, they always say, oh, this could have been an email, this could have been a text, but it's like, no, like I actually want to know how your day is, alongside talking about what's the projections for Q4, like, stuff like that. And then just look at the different tasks that you have, and you figure out like, okay, what can be delegated, because some things actually just need in-person staff to do that. And then you look at what can be automated via AI. So one creator that I really love on Instagram, her name is TECWomen, TECWomen.ai, and that's the name of her website. And she actually has a really great free resource to look at, once you know the task that you have, ways you can automate it using AI tools. And then actually look at how some tasks can just be completely taken off of your plate. Like, you just shouldn't be doing that to begin with. Like, there's no ROI, whether human or monetary. And then looking at the fourth thing, looking at what things you actually want to keep doing. So for example, I'm very intentional about like keeping space on my calendar for phone calls, for voice notes, catching up with people, doing Zoom meetings. I prefer in-person coffee, as opposed to like phone calls and things of that sort. So there's different ways of going about it, but I think once you can align what you're actually doing on a day-to-day basis alongside what are your values, so for me, in-person communication, then you can figure out like, okay, wow, AI can actually take over about 60% of this work so that I can focus on actually making sure that I'm present for investor meetings. Like, if you hate making slides, you know what I mean? Then delegate making the slides so you can focus on how you're going to have a good conversation with that investor during that meeting, or how you're going to communicate the value of your startup to that customer call that you're going to have. Like, there's ways to prioritize your time so that people, number one, trust you, because the human to human element is only going to increase now. Like, if I have to talk to an AI bot to get to you, I don't know your personality, and people are really doing business with other people that they know, number one, number two, that they trust, and number three, that they feel like their money is actually being put to good use, because there's so many options now. There's so many AI note takers. You know what I mean? So now I'm looking like, okay, which AI note taker, has a good, value system, and what principles was it based on? How do they look at their AI usage and its environmental impact? Like, all those things that we thought didn't matter before actually matter more now because of the plethora of options and tools. So,
yeah, and I think that's really interesting. I think what you were saying too about that human element as well, and trying to understand again where there's stuff, maybe low value bits that you can use AI for, and that's fine. And then there's the stuff where if it's got to be really good, do you really trust it to not look like everybody else's?
Yeah, exactly.
I was thinking too, with what Dickon was saying earlier in the earlier session about with recruitment. Yeah, I mean, we were just recruiting for a role recently, and oh my God, the number of applicants where you're like, yeah, you didn't even know that this job was available. You just pressed a button and AI submitted it to us. Yeah. And this is a really integral role in our office. It's dealing with everybody every day. We needed a real person in there. Yeah. And the ones that stood out were the ones that were really obviously applying for it. When they came to the interview, they knew who we were and what we did. Yeah. And, because we're not hiring AI, we were hiring a person. Yeah. So, again, using a tool to find jobs, great. Yeah. Using a tool to share your CV out, fine. Yeah. But if there's not a person behind it, I think it's that interesting thing too, is because of that, I know a lot of people who are like, oh, I'm only going to hire the people I know. Because I don't want to have to sift through 75 AI applications. Yeah. And the danger of that then is we're making the market smaller again. Yeah. So if anything, as you were saying earlier, that's why it's even more important to go out and make those interpersonal communications. It's important to grow your in-person network as well, and to be real and authentic. Yeah. Because there is a bit of a backlash happening as much as it's advancing. People are
Yeah.
already talking about a bubble. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that was fast. Not as fast as blockchain, but
yeah,
it's there.
exactly. Yeah.
But and it's good. I think we're asking the right questions, but it's okay. How do we augment this? How do we have human and AI together? And I know that's a space. Again, you're really big on. You talk about a lot. Is that how do we have humanities and AI, and they can actually be friends?
Yeah. And I always say, like, the humanities and the AI industry does not have to be mortal enemies. So that's, so when ChatGPT was released to the world, it was 2022. And I remember I was a teaching fellow at Harvard at that point, and I saw the impact of AI almost immediately. Like, I started having AI generated essays. And back then, this is how quickly the technology has evolved. Back then, AI used to snitch on itself. Like, at the bottom, it would say, like, oh, this was produced by, like, ChatGPT. Like, you know what I mean? So for the unknowing student who just wanted to get the paper in by midnight, they're just like, and this essay was produced by, like, ChatGPT. But the funny part about that, actually, which, talks about the entire economic shift we're going to see, is that I actually missed that version of AI, because if anything, it taught the system citational practices. Because what's happening right now is that with all these different AI tools, with all these different AI generated content, it's not actually citing the sources in which it's getting that information. So people are blindly applying whatever AI says to do. And then number two, it's not actually helping those who help build the LLMs that are creating these systems, right? So there's so many creators, artists, authors, people in the humanities that made your post possible. And I think what we have to think about now as the economy is shifting is, okay, as we're teaching more and more people how to use AI, which is important, don't get me wrong, you should also teach the humanities-like skills alongside of it. So the more you learn about LLMs, the more you should learn about literature. The more you learn about how to, construct AI agents, the more you should learn about interpersonal communication. Like, there's some people where it's like, you have an amazing product, you have an amazing company, but you can't sell it because your personality sucks. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
AI's not pitching for you yet.
AI's not pitching for you, exactly. And it's like, if I don't like being around you, having those team meetings are going to be hard. Then you have poor talent pipelines, right? If you don't know how to communicate the vision of your company and you're just like, write this speech in the style of Steve Jobs, you don't have the charisma of Steve Jobs. So you can't execute that speech in order to get the investors that you need in order to have that company. And I always tell people, when I hesitantly had to become a creator founder, my advisors, right after we became semifinalists in the Harvard President's Innovation Challenge, they're like, hey, we know this is like analog, but you got to get on social media because nobody knows analog social exists. And I had to go through that journey of like, okay, how do I tell the unique story of myself as a founder in analog social without burning out from that churning of content creation? And I had to reach the point where I was like, you know what, let me just show off my personality. Like, let me talk about how I understand this founder burnout problem. And then next thing you know, I got overwhelmed again, because then my platform grew from just like 700 random people who, I don't know, liked hearing me talk about whatever I was talking about back then, to now 40,000 people. So now I have to steward different modes of storytelling to, bring more attention to analog social. And that's what I'm trying to help other founders do too, where it's like, you have a unique story. Even though you're the 37th AI note taker app to exist on the market, if you can talk about how storytelling was in your lineage since, the early 1900s, and the ways that you love to keep founders focused on what's at hand as opposed to, whatever other low drudgery work they shouldn't be doing. That's a beautiful story. Like, what I mean? Where did you come from? How do you see the problem? How do you push past obstacles? Like that is so important. And I think sometimes because we focus so much on the technology, we forget the other elements that humanities education can teach us, which is storytelling, how to have empathy, how to connect with other people, how to have a personality, and how to know when to stop.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think, one of the things we've run a workshop recently for young people, and we actually ran one on how to use AI to write your personal statement within UCAS guidelines, which says don't use AI to write a personal statement. But when you look into it, and what we said to them is, we said, look, you can use AI as a tool.
Yeah.
You should be writing your personal statement about who you are. If AI writes it, you could be anyone. And then how are you going to stand out in an application? You don't want a personal statement that looks like everybody else.
Yeah.
But you can use it to say, hey, is this short enough? Have I focused this enough? This is the university I want to go to. Have I hit the things that they're interested in? But it's still your story.
Yeah.
It's your anecdotes. It's your experiences. If you let AI write it for you, one, it'll give you skills you didn't know you had.
Yeah.
And two,
I'm a prize carpenter.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I built a video game that's had 200,000 followers. Wait, I didn't do that.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
But it'll be the same as everyone else's, and they've all used the same one.
Yeah.
But like you said, at the end of the day, like, it's your story to tell.
Yeah.
Or it's your business to make. It's your company to build. So if we can use that augmentation of bringing AI for the areas that can help you amplify it, then we've got options. Speaking of, you were really good about knowing how to stay on time. You and I are very bad at that based on our earlier conversation. We are on time by a minute. So I think we have time for questions, and I've got some nice tech. I've got analog and digital going on here. So this is your chance. If you guys have got any questions, there's the Slido app. If you haven't used that and you just want to put your hand up and do it analog style, you're welcome to do that too. I haven't got any Slido questions, so if anybody's got any live questions, yes.
Hi, Shae.
Hi.
Your talk's very interesting and very timely. I'd like to get your thoughts on AI companies also pushing a digital workforce. I think it's something we're starting to see, which is more so, replacing humans or sort of having a few employees that are augmented by AI. And I think that's sort of going to shift the future of the workforce, especially as an AI founder. It's stuff I see quite a lot.
Yeah.
Looking at more profitability, less costs and salaries and things like that. How do you think it's going to shape, the future of startups in that sense here?
Sorry, what's your name?
Fifi.
Okay, nice to meet you, Fifi. Oh, yes. Okay, so the question was, how should AI founders think about a digital or a shift to a digital workforce in ways that, as a founder or as someone who's working at an AI company, can sort of, think about that on like a global and I guess also like miniature scale. So I think there's different ways to think about it. Number one, figure out what you value in your current human workforce that you're trying to replace by AI. Because, for example, right now, at the time of this recording, I always have to say this whenever I do talks, because, something might shift tomorrow, and they're like, oh, actually, we have super intelligence, which I don't actually think is possible, but that's a whole other thing. But at the time of this recording, AI is really bad at memory. They're trying so hard to extend the memory capabilities of a lot of these large language models, and I know a lot of data scientists who are really like working hard on that issue. But I always say what makes certain founders or even workers extremely helpful is their capacity for memory and things that they remember. Like some of the connections that I've seen founders make and how they're reimagining the product is because they have a memory from their childhood that reminds them of that feeling that they want to invoke in their customer base. Like that is extremely unique. I didn't grow up in, apartheid South Africa. I don't know what that experience is like, but it really does help shape the value system and the way in which you're envisioning that product. So I think we have to think about that on like a large scale. When you hire somebody, you're not just hiring, their skill set, you're hiring their personality, you're hiring their memories, you're also hiring their connections, because a lot of the way that Analog Social grew from like 0 to thousands of people within a 2-month time span was through word of mouth, because we had people that attended a dinner or like watched a video or, knew someone in the Analog Social community and they said, oh, you should really come to this. Like, you know what I mean? I didn't have any go-to-market strategy. I was just burnt out and I was like, I want to yap to some people, every Friday night, in DC or London or whatever community that is. And each person brings their own unique network. And I always say, if you feel like those people are disposable, why'd you hire them in the first place? Because it wasn't just skill set, and we love to think it is only skill set, but it's more than that. Humans are complex beings, and we should treat them as such.
I've got one more question that I'm trying to convince Shona to let me ask, just because I think it's really good, whoever put it in on Slido, which was around transparency. So you mentioned how you liked old AI. Do you think that we're going to move towards a future where there's a transparent AI model usage within startups? So where startups are actually transparent about it and how they're using AI, what kind of AI, so things around their algorithm and energy use versus kind of black box AI companies.
Yeah, honestly, I think we're really moving towards more transparent AI because consumers are demanding it and businesses are demanding it. And we're going to reach a point where even governments are going to demand it because we're sort of in a free-for-all of the AI space right now because there's not as much regulation, guardrails, consumer demands, and things of that sort. But all of that's going to shift, I would say, within the next 12 months where people will determine whether or not they'll use a product, whether it's based on an open source LLM or, a ChatGPT LLM, whether they can actually track their environmental impact, even though the environmental impact is slowly decreasing with certain models. All of that is going to completely and radically shift. And if you don't start focusing on those numbers and having them ready, then that might be a huge problem for your startup long term. So.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Cool. We have to wrap it up there. But I should say as well, Shae and I are both regularly on social media. If you like what we say, we share a lot and we're very authentic and open on there. So connect with us on there. Check us out. Shae's got some awesome YouTube videos as well. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Such a pleasure. Thank you.